brutally honest, people who can demonstrate value and bring more to LD Studios than we had before. So we don't just want developers, like people who come in and do their code and come in at 9, do their code, leave at 5, repeat Monday through Friday. Like we need people who can bring a little bit more to the table in that. Just as a small company, it's just really important to have people who are kind of like the total package, like A players. So one thing that I notice is that lots of people say that they know Ruby on Rails, but then once I start to get into the technical interview, I start to realize that they don't really know Ruby on Rails. They might have read a book over a weekend, but that's about as deep as their knowledge goes. So one thing that I try to do is tell people that instead of just saying all this stuff, show me, demonstrate to me that you know it. Sometimes doing hack apps and your projects that you're doing in here, share them on GitHub. Don't just keep them on your computer. Make them just release them openly and publicly, so that when you're in that type of situation, I can actually just go in and look at your code and see where you're at.
Yeah, even if they're not perfect or they're a work in progress, it just kind of shows that you're active on sites like GitHub and that you're working on things.
Yeah. Not to get too into it, but I can actually kind of look at your Git history and kind of see the way the app has evolved over time, and that kind of gives me a little bit more definition around the project itself and just kind of where you're at, just kind of in terms of building software and releasing it and packaging things into nice little small groups of stories, nice little small focused commits. I highly recommend for everyone trying to get a Ruby job to get very active in the Ruby community. They are a very nice group of people. One thing that I really hope people do when I'm interviewing them is that they name drop people that I know, because that just kind of helps build credibility. If you know people that I've worked with in the past, from ATL Rug, and they know you, they can vouch for you. Maybe you went to a hackathon or something, or Startup Atlanta, or did one of the events around town. All that stuff just really just helps show us that you're active and engaged in the Atlanta development community, and that's just really strong for us. It just really goes back to not being that 9-to-5 developer like a big company would be hiring for. Giving a conference talk is also a really strong thing to bring up and mention. If you can show me a link to a conference agenda that you did a talk about something, even if it's not related to Ruby, maybe it's just in the past, that's really strong too.
Yeah, and it can be the small, there's the weekly or monthly Ruby meetups, record it, or something, with maybe 5 people on it. It just shows communication, which, we love developers, but that's one part that we feel that's the hardest probably challenge for us, is to find a great coder and communicator. So we like anyone that can go out and stand up in front of people, because that is very nerve-wracking. I'm much more comfortable behind a computer.
And then contributing to open source projects is also a really good plus for us too. So that's basically any of the gems you're using. You don't have to necessarily contribute to Ruby on Rails itself. I know they have a lot of people already on that, but for me personally, my typical open source contribution is I'm trying to do something with a gem and it doesn't work quite right, so I'll just fork it, put in what I need, and then submit it back to them, and they can accept it or not accept it. Personally, I don't care if they do or don't, but it's still considered an open source contribution. They can take it. It's still solving a problem that I was having with a certain client. I can still link to my own personal copy, on GitHub and all that kind of stuff, and just maintain it as I need to. But for interviewing, if you're contributing to open source, even if it's little, updating the documentation, or updating the gem dependencies or anything like that, just kind of shows that you're digging in and getting used to that process of giving back to the open source community that has provided this amazing framework and toolkit that we're all using. So for us, one thing that we definitely take note of is attitude over aptitude. We care much more about like where your head's at and not necessarily what your IQ is. I mean, great IQ is awesome, but you know,
EQ, we care more about
EQ
EQ versus
over
IQ.
So one thing that's also very important to mention here is we have a very relaxed office environment. So culture fit is very important for us. We don't tell people that you have to work 9 to 5, like from whenever. We let people work whenever they want, wherever they want, you know, kind of at the times that they want, as long as they get their work done. It's called a ROW, results only work environment. We can talk about that a little bit after this, once we're done with the presentation. But my developers need to have the maturity to handle that kind of like lax environment. And I need to trust that when I'm not like engaging with them all the time, that they are getting their stuff done. We have a variety of ways to do that, like different ways of like kind of exposing the work, defining like what is, you know, a good week, you know, what does a bad week look like, and all that stuff. It's very open. There's a lot of communication. But we need people who can work in that type of like loose environment. So that's why culture fit is very important to us too. One thing, showing an eagerness to learn and adapt is very crucial. We look for that. That kind of goes back to getting, you know, connected with the community itself, and then just being generally open to being, you know, critiqued by your other more senior engineers at LD Studios, specifically me. Basically being able to accept and give feedback through regular code review. We do code review once a week. Every engineer at LD Studios must code review one of their peers on a weekly basis. And we just do that by going into GitHub, going to the commits tab and just opening a whole bunch of tabs, like in Chrome. You just click on each commit, like all the way down the page, open up a ton of tabs, and just, you know, work through them one at a time, just kind of commenting, you know, learning, seeing, saying, hey, I didn't know Rails had like a crazy method for, you know, converting, you know, things into dashes, you know, like, or hey, I see you programmed this yourself, but did you know that active support has a method for that? And you just kind of put that kind of stuff like into the comments. And then oftentimes I'll say, hey, I didn't know that gym existed, because it happens more frequently than I may like to admit, but my more junior developers like kind of know the more like the newer things. Like the senior people tend to kind of get in the same habit of using the same tools over and over and over again, like even if they might be getting a little old. So oftentimes I'll see my newer developers like using new gyms that I hadn't heard of, and I'll just kind of comment and be like, oh cool, didn't know that existed. Then that'll prompt me to open up, you know, GitHub and look at the README and kind of learn something new. So we make it both directions. It's not like senior people like telling the junior people what to do. It's more just the senior people like instructing and learning off the juniors, and kind of the same direction with the juniors too. Like even they go in and code review me. Like, so for us, just being able to like have that personality of being able to accept feedback, you know, for what it is. It's just feedback, like it's something personal. And then being able to like learn and grow through regular code review is really important for us. So the next bit is we just need to make sure that everyone that we hire is understanding of clients, customers, and peers who are less technical than them. Basically every client that you have through LD Studios will not be a technical person. So we just need people who have that bit of like humility built into themselves to, you know, not think that like they're, you know, better or smarter than the person on the other side. We just have different skills, and that's all. So you're usually working with an entrepreneur or some kind of like CEO or CTO who wants to build a company. Like they have very strong business skills, just not very strong technical skills, obviously. So, you know, we work with that. We just want people to feel comfortable and, you know, not like intimidated or like worst case scenario offended, you know, by working with, you know, people with a little bit of a, you know, I guess like a complex is the best way to describe it. So this is definitely more of a functional skill for us. Everything's been, pretty interpersonal. Testing frameworks. I will not hire anyone who has not at least done elementary testing. Like, I'll screen out candidates. If they show me an app, it doesn't have tests in it, I'll say, great, come back later after you've written tests for your apps. And then we'll talk. The reason I do that is it's critically important to our process that everyone understands the importance of writing tests and kind of knows at least the basics, like on day one. We need people contributing tests, like basically on their first commit. So just for me as a CTO, I've had to basically just draw a line in the sand and say, like, all candidates must have basic familiarity with, RSpec, Minitest, or Cucumber, or one of the different Ruby-based testing tools. So I've seen people coming out of other code schools, not this one necessarily, where they did not put an emphasis on testing in that program. I basically just had to tell those people, you really must learn this. Like, it's critical to, like, software engineering in general as a Ruby developer to know that skill. So I just wanted to highlight that. We just really need people to come in, like, knowing testing on day one. I found that I can basically teach anything about Rails and Ruby, but if I'm having to also teach, like, how to test and kind of like what that process looks like and how to configure RSpec and things like that, that's just a little bit more of a hurdle than I want to cross with a new developer. I'd rather just have them, start knowing that. So, but not knowing it isn't a deal breaker. I just say, like, reapply again, like, later. I just want you to start with